My name is Harper Wilson. I am 18 years old. Right now, I am standing in the center of my own birthday party, holding a silver cake knife, listening to my father and my older brother finalize a plan to steal my inheritance. The party is in the backyard of our house in Palo Alto. String lights are draped over the patio. A catered spread sits on a long oak table. 50 guests are drinking wine and talking over a low jazz playlist. My mother, Patricia, is floating between groups of neighbors, offering hors d'oeuvres and talking about how proud she is of her children. It looks like a celebration. It is actually a smokescreen. By the sliding glass door, my father Richard pulls my brother Liam aside. They think the music drowns them out. They think I am too busy smiling at the neighbors to notice the manila folder tucked under Liam's arm. But I spend my afternoons working as a digital records archivist for the local historical society. My job is to notice the details other people discard. I see Richard tap the folder. I see him lean in close. First thing tomorrow morning, Richard whispers. We record the deed at the county office and it is done. Just act natural until then. Liam smirks. He is 24, running a tech startup that is currently hemorrhaging cash, but you would never know it by looking at him. He adjusts his expensive linen blazer and claps our father on the shoulder. They turn back toward the crowd, their faces smoothing into practiced, perfect smiles. I smile back. I slice a piece of red velvet cake and hand it to Mrs. Gable from next door. I do not confront them. I do not drop my cake knife. I do not make a scene in front of the neighbors. A scene is what you make when you have no actual power. I have something better. I have the receipts. They think tomorrow morning is their finish line. They have no idea the race ended 12 hours ago. Last night, at exactly midnight while my family slept down the hall, I locked my bedroom door. I opened my laptop. I logged into a secure portal managed by a trust attorney in San Francisco. And with 3 electronic signatures, I legally activated an irrevocable trust established by my late grandmother Beatrice. That trust holds a pristine $3.5 million coastal estate in Carmel by the sea, along with a heavily funded investment portfolio. By signing those forms at the exact second I became a legal adult, I triggered a legal mechanism that locked the title down tight. It belongs to me. It cannot be sold, transferred, or leveraged without my explicit authorization. My father and brother do not know this. They think they found a loophole. They think they can file a fraudulent quitclaim deed tomorrow to siphon my inheritance into Liam's failing company. They think I am a naive teenager who will just cry and accept it when the paperwork is filed. I hand out another slice of cake. Liam catches my eye and raises his champagne glass in a mock toast. To Harper, he calls out loud enough for the patio to hear, entering the real world. The guests clap. My mother beams. I raise my own glass of sparkling cider and meet my brother's eyes. The real world. He has no idea how right he is. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, they will walk into the Monterey County Recorder's office with their forged paperwork. And they are going to find a steel wall waiting for them. Before I explain how a father and a son decided to commit real estate fraud against their own blood, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from today and what time it is there. I read every single one to understand why they chose to sacrifice me. And why I let them walk right into a trap they built themselves. You need to understand the woman who handed me the keys. Let me take you back 6 years to a summer on the coast, when my grandmother taught me the difference between the people who build homes and the people who just build ledgers. The summer I turned 12, the air in Palo Alto felt thin and dry, but the drive down the Pacific Coast Highway changed everything. The temperature would drop 10 degrees the moment we hit Monterey County. The fog rolled in thick off the ocean, bringing the smell of crushed pine needles, damp earth, and heavy sea salt. That was where my grandmother Beatrice lived. Her house in Carmel by the sea was not one of those modern glass boxes perched precariously on a cliff. It was built of weathered cedar and river stone. It sat back from the water, anchored by ancient Monterey pines that shielded the roof from the wind. The foundation was poured thick. The floorboards were wide planks of solid oak that never creaked. Beatrice was just like the house. She did not raise her voice. She did not wear loud jewelry or perform for guests. While other grandmothers spent their afternoons baking or knitting, Beatrice spent hers in a leather wingback chair behind a solid mahogany desk, reviewing property deeds and municipal bonds. She wore sharp reading glasses on a silver chain and kept a silver letter opener perfectly aligned with the edge of her blotter. She was the only adult in my family who looked at me and saw a person rather than a prop. My parents dropped me off at the estate that June with barely a goodbye. My mother Patricia complained about the coastal dampness ruining her hair. My father Richard stood on the back deck not to admire the Pacific Ocean, but to calculate the lot size. I remember him pointing at the empty parcel of land next door, muttering about zoning permits and capital gains. Then they got back in their luxury SUV and drove away, leaving me for 8 weeks. The first morning alone with Beatrice, she did not ask me if I wanted to play games. She handed me a stack of manila folders. "We are going to organize the records," she said. "Alphabetical by grantor, then chronological by filing date." I sat on the rug in her study for hours sorting through property tax histories, municipal assessments, and contractor agreements. I found the rhythm in the paperwork. I liked the order of it. Beatrice watched me from her desk. When I finished, she handed me a magnifying glass and a dense 5-page contract for a roof repair she was commissioning. "Read the 4th paragraph on page 3, Beatrice instructed. "Tell me what it actually says." I read the dense legal jargon. I stumbled over the vocabulary, but I pieced it together. "It says they do not have to fix the roof if it rains." Beatrice nodded once. A slow, approving nod. "That is called an escape clause, Harper. People bury their true intentions in the fine print. They hide the danger where they assume you will be too tired to look." She took the contract back and drew a thick black line through the paragraph. Later that evening, we sat on the back deck. The fog was rolling in, obscuring the horizon. Beatrice wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shoulders. "There are 2 types of people in the world, Harper," she said softly, watching the tide crash against the rocks below. "Some people build homes. They lay a foundation, they weather the storms, and they create an anchor. An anchor keeps you from drifting when the water gets rough." She paused, taking a sip of black tea. "Then there are people who only build ledgers. They look at a roof and see a depreciation asset. They look at a forest and see lumber prices. They measure their lives in profit margins. Your parents are ledger builders. They do not understand the value of an anchor. Because of that, they will always be adrift." I was 12, but I understood perfectly. I thought about the way my father paced our house in Palo Alto, always stressed about the next mortgage payment, the next car lease, the next country club due. Our house back home was larger than Beatrice's, but it felt hollow. It felt like a stage set waiting to be struck. 2 weeks later, the ledger builders returned for a mandatory weekend visit. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate and suffocating. Patricia walked through the front door and immediately suggested Beatrice replace the antique oak dining table with something modern. Richard spent the entire Saturday morning pacing the living room on a loud phone call, arguing with a broker about liquidity. I sat quietly in the corner window seat reading a book. They did not ask how my summer was going. They did not ask what I was reading. Instead, Richard ended his call and turned to Beatrice, who was calmly pouring a cup of coffee. "You are sitting on a gold mine here, Mother," Richard said, gesturing toward the ocean view. "Property values in Carmel are skyrocketing. If you liquidated this place, you could double the yield in a diversified portfolio. It is careless to leave this much equity trapped in wood and stone." Beatrice set the coffee pot down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the granite counter. "This house is not equity, Richard. It is a home. I plan to die in it." Richard sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like she was a stubborn child. "You are being sentimental. Sentiment does not pay dividends. Liam is heading to college soon. He is going to need capital for his ventures. You have to start thinking strategically about the family assets." Even at 12, I felt the cold sting of his words. The family assets. He was already carving up her home in his mind, earmarking the profits for my brother. Liam was 18 at the time, spending the summer at an elite business camp on the East Coast. Liam was the golden child, the presumed heir to a dynasty my father was desperately trying to fake. Beatrice looked at Richard. Her expression was entirely unreadable. She did not argue, She simply picked up her coffee cup, walked past him, and returned to her study. That afternoon, Beatrice called me into the study. She closed the heavy oak door. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her mahogany desk and pulled out a fresh stack of documents. "Harper," she said, her voice lower than usual, "I need you to understand how title insurance works." For the rest of the summer, my education intensified. Beatrice taught me how to cross-reference county records. She showed me how to identify a warranty deed versus a quitclaim deed. She explained the concept of holding property in a trust to avoid the probate process. I absorbed it all. I did not know I was training for a war. I just liked the quiet, logical rules of the law. The law did not care about who the favorite child was. The law only cared about ink on paper. When August ended, Richard and Patricia returned to collect me. I packed my bags. I stood on the front porch, the smell of sea salt already fading. Beatrice hugged me. She held me tighter than she usually did. "Remember the fine print," she whispered in my ear. "Keep your eyes on the documents, Harper. Let them talk. You read." I got into the back seat of my parents' luxury SUV. We drove back up the Pacific Coast Highway, leaving the cool fog for the dry, suffocating heat of Silicon Valley. I sat in the back silent, watching the back of my father's head. He spent the entire 3-hour drive talking to Patricia about a new private loan he was taking out to cover Liam's freshman year expenses. He talked about leveraging his business lines of credit. He talked about high interest rates like they were temporary inconveniences. I realized then what Beatrice meant. My father was building a ledger, but the numbers were turning red. He was digging a hole. And as the years went by, that hole would turn into a crater. A crater so deep and so dark, they would eventually try to throw me inside, just to create a stepping stone for my brother. But they forgot one crucial detail. They forgot who raised me during those summers. They forgot that while they were teaching Liam how to spend money, Beatrice was teaching me how to protect it. And Liam's spending was about to become a problem they could no longer hide. 6 years is a long time to watch a hole turn into a crater. By the time I turned 17, my brother Liam was 24, and the crater he dug had swallowed our family whole. Liam ran a tech startup in Silicon Valley. He called it a lifestyle optimization platform. It was an application designed to track user habits, sync with smart home devices, and suggest daily routines. It generated zero revenue. The market was flooded with identical products. But Liam leased an open-concept office space in the South of Market District in San Francisco. He bought custom glass whiteboards for the conference room. He paid for weekly catered lunches from organic cafes for his 3 employees. He burned through cash with the casual confidence of a boy who never had to pay his own credit card bill. Richard and Patricia funded the illusion. As an archivist, my job is to organize and preserve records. At home, I applied those same skills to the Daily Mail. I intercepted the bank envelopes. I read the financial notices before my father snatched them off the kitchen counter. I treated their ruin as an accounting exercise, logging the hard numbers in my memory. Richard took out a second mortgage on our Palo Alto house, pulling $400,000 in equity to seed Liam's initial launch. When that money evaporated in 8 months, Richard liquidated his primary retirement fund. Another $150,000 vanished into payroll and office rent. Patricia opened 3 high-limit credit cards in her own name to cover Liam's personal expenses, allowing him to maintain the appearance of a successful founder. They gambled their entire financial future on a son who spent his afternoons picking out ergonomic office chairs. Meanwhile, I asked for nothing. In April of my junior year, I earned a state archivist fellowship. It came with a $5,000 educational grant and a guaranteed summer placement at the State Historical Records Department. I spent 6 months compiling primary source documents to build my application portfolio. I was the only high school student selected in the entire region. I brought the official acceptance letter home on a Thursday evening. I walked into the kitchen expecting to find my parents. Instead, I found a catering crew. Patricia had hired a private chef to prepare wild-caught salmon and truffle risotto. She was hosting an exclusive dinner party for Liam's angel investors, desperately trying to secure his next round of funding. I set my fellowship letter on the granite island. I told my mother I won the grant. Patricia wiped her hands on a linen towel. She glanced at the paper, then looked back at the caterers arranging the silverware. "That is nice, Harper," she said, her voice tight with stress. "But please put that away right now. Marcus Thorne is arriving in 20 minutes, and I need the island clear for the appetizers. We are trying to save your brother's company tonight." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or demand her attention. I picked up the letter and took it to my bedroom. I placed it in a neat folder on my desk. I catalogued the interaction the same way I catalogued historical documents. It was simply a data point. My mother valued a platter of appetizers over my academic future. I filed the information away, smoothed my expression into a polite mask, and went back downstairs to observe the dinner. The evening was an exercise in desperation disguised as luxury. Richard poured expensive wine from a vineyard in Napa. Liam talked in circles about user acquisition pipelines and market disruption. Patricia laughed at jokes that were not funny. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table. Marcus was a veteran venture capitalist who had built his wealth by recognizing failure early. He did not care about the truffle risotto. He did not care about Liam's custom linen blazer. He cared about the burn rate. After dessert, Marcus set his napkin down. The dining room grew uncomfortably quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. He looked directly at Liam. "Your user retention is dropping by 12% every month," Marcus said, his voice flat and unbothered. "Your customer acquisition cost is unsustainable. You are spending $10 to acquire users who generate 0 cents in return. I am pausing the Series A funding." Richard stood up quickly. He tried to laugh, reaching for the wine bottle. "Marcus, we are just hitting our stride. The new update launches next month. We just need a short runway to roll out the premium features." Marcus shook his head, placing his hand over his empty wine glass. "If you want a bridge loan to keep the lights on for another 6 months, I need hard collateral. I am not backing a $500,000 bridge loan with speculative software. I need real estate. Bring me a clean title to a high-value property, and I will release $500,000 tomorrow. Otherwise, I pull my equity on Monday morning and the company folds." Marcus stood up, thanked Patricia for the meal, and walked out the front door. The caterers packed up their equipment in tense silence and drove away. The house grew silent. I sat on the stairs in the dark hallway out of sight, listening to the conversation in the living room. Liam paced the floor. He blamed the market trends. He blamed his marketing director. Richard sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. "We have nothing left to leverage," Richard said, his voice hollow. "The bank owns this house twice over. My retirement is gone. Your mother has $40,000 in credit card debt. We cannot secure a bridge loan." Patricia stood by the window looking out into the dark yard. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet house it carried perfectly. "What about Carmel?" she asked. Richard looked up. "Beatrice's estate. It is owned free and clear. It appraised at over $3 million last year." My father rubbed his jaw, shaking his head. "She will never sign it over to us. You know how she is. She refuses to liquidate. She told me to my face that sentiment does not pay dividends, but she treats that house like a museum." Patricia turned away from the window. The ambient light from the street lamp cast long shadows across her face. "Her health is failing, Richard," Patricia said smoothly. "She forgets things. She cannot manage a property that size anymore. It is irresponsible to let that much equity sit there while our son loses everything. We have power of attorney for her medical decisions. We just need to expand it to her financial estate. We tell her we are managing the property for her own protection." Liam stopped pacing. A slow, relieved smile spread across his face. He looked at our parents. "So we just need to get the title in our name," Liam said. "Then we hand it to Marcus, secure the loan, and I keep my company." I sat on the dark staircase, my hands resting quietly on my knees. I listened to my family calmly discuss stripping my grandmother of her home to pay for my brother's mistakes. They saw a woman losing her physical strength, and they saw a financial opportunity. They viewed her coastal estate as a life raft for their sinking ship. They twisted their theft into a narrative of protection, convincing themselves they were doing the right thing for the family. They just had to wait for Beatrice to lose her grip on the deed. They did not know that Beatrice had already recognized their desperation, and they certainly did not know she had already handed the anchor to me. Beatrice passed away on a Tuesday in October. I was 17 years old. The memorial service was held at a high-end chapel in Monterey, but my parents treated the afternoon like a corporate networking event. Patricia wore designer black and spent the reception holding a glass of sparkling water, speaking in hushed, eager tones, with probate lawyers and luxury real estate brokers. Richard checked his phone every 3 minutes, monitoring the stock market and texting Liam about investor updates. My father even delivered a eulogy about building a legacy, making deliberate eye contact with a bank executive in the third row. I sat in the front pew wearing a simple navy dress, watching the performance. I did not cry during the service. I catalogued the hypocrisy. We drove to the coastal estate the following morning. My parents did not come to mourn. They came to inventory. The moment Richard unlocked the front door, the echo of the house felt different. The warmth was gone. The living room, with its weathered cedar walls and ancient stone fireplace, suddenly felt like a showroom waiting to be stripped. Richard walked straight to the center of the room and began tapping the walls, searching for structural issues he could use as leverage with a staging company. Patricia started pulling back rugs to check the condition of the oak floorboards. They handed me a roll of packing tape and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. "Pack up the study," Richard instructed, his tone brisk and distracted. "Shred the old utility bills. Box up the books. We need that room cleared by the weekend so the appraisers can measure the square footage." They gave me the grunt work because they assumed the study held nothing of liquid value. They thought it was just dusty novels and expired coupons. They fundamentally misunderstood who Beatrice was. I walked down the hall and closed the heavy oak door of the study behind me. The room smelled exactly as it always had: dust, cedar wood, and black tea. I stood in the center of the rug, listening to the muffled sounds of my parents down the hall. Patricia was already discussing whether they should paint the master bedroom a neutral beige to attract younger buyers. I walked over to the mahogany desk. As an archivist, you learn that people store their most valuable truths in the places their hands touch the most. I started with the top drawers, pulling out decoy items: spare reading glasses, dried out ink pens, stacks of blank stationery. I moved to the deep bottom drawer on the right side. I pulled it open. It was meant for hanging file folders, but it was empty. Yet, as I pulled it off the metal tracks and rested it on the rug, it felt heavier than an empty wooden drawer should feel. I ran my hands along the interior. I measured the depth of the outside panel against the depth of the inside floor. There was a 2-inch discrepancy. My fingers traced the bottom seams, pressing into the corners. Near the back left joint, I felt a tiny flush brass catch. I pressed it hard. The false wooden bottom clicked and popped up 1/2 inch. I lifted the panel. Inside the shallow hidden compartment sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front, in Beatrice's sharp, sloping cursive in dark blue ink. I broke the seal. A heavy cardstock business card fell into my palm. The text was minimalist and precise. Evelyn Davis, trust attorney, San Francisco. Wrapped around the card was a single sheet of stationery. I unfolded the paper and read my grandmother's words. "Harper, if you are reading this, I am gone, and your father is already pricing the furniture. Richard and Patricia have leveraged themselves into a corner they cannot escape. Liam's ventures are sinking them. They will look to this house to save themselves. They will try to take it. Do not let them. You know how to read the fine print. Call Evelyn. The anchor holds." My chest tightened. It was a tactical briefing from a general to a soldier. Beatrice knew exactly what my parents would do, and she left the weapon waiting for me in the dark. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Richard's voice carried through the wood. He was agitated, arguing with Patricia about finding the insurance policies. The footsteps stopped right outside the study. The brass doorknob began to turn. I had 3 seconds. I shoved the business card, the letter, and the envelope down the back of my jeans, pulling the hem of my sweater down to cover my waistband. I slammed the false bottom shut, hoisted the heavy drawer, and slid it back onto the metal tracks, just as the door swung open. Richard stood in the doorway. He was out of breath. His tie loosened, his face flushed with stress. He did not look at me. He looked past me, scanning the room for a wall safe or a hidden filing cabinet. "Where did she keep the title documents?" Richard demanded, his tone clipped and impatient. "I need the original deed for the broker." "Have you found the safe deposit keys?" I looked at him. I saw the raw greed sweating out of his pores. I knew that if I showed defiance, he would become suspicious. If I showed strength, he would see a threat. Ledger builders are always looking for obstacles to eliminate. So I gave him the one thing a ledger builder despises. I gave him messy, unproductive emotion. I let my shoulders drop. I forced my breathing to hitch, taking a shallow, ragged inhale. I looked down at the empty cardboard boxes at my feet and let my lower lip tremble. I pushed a single hot tear out of the corner of my eye. "I do not know," I whispered, making my voice shake. "I was just looking at her reading glasses. I miss her so much, Dad." Richard recoiled. He physically took a step back, repulsed by the display of grief. Dealing with a crying 17-year-old was a liability he did not have the bandwidth to manage. It disrupted his timeline. He waved his hand in a short, dismissive arc. "Just pack the books, Harper," he said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "I will look in the master bedroom. Do not make a mess in here." He turned and walked away, pulling the door shut behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the room. The moment the door secured, I wiped my face. The tears stopped instantly. My breathing leveled out. The performance was over. I stood alone in my grandmother's study and realized the fundamental truth of my family. My parents did not view Beatrice's death as a tragedy. They viewed it as a financial clearance, a windfall waiting to be liquidated. And they viewed me as a convenient maid to sweep up the dust while they robbed the vault. This was the exact moment I instituted the information diet. From that second forward, my parents would never hear another genuine thought from my head. They would get polite nods. They would get the quiet, compliant daughter they expected. I would shrink myself into a ghost in my own house, taking up no space, offering no resistance. But ghosts see everything. I reached around and pulled the heavy cardstock business card from my waistband. I stared at the name, Evelyn Davis. I memorized the 10-digit phone number printed at the bottom. Richard thought he had time to play real estate broker. He thought he was the smartest person in the house. He did not realize that Beatrice had initiated a legal sequence years ago, and I was holding the trigger. My next step was clear. I needed to meet Evelyn Davis, and I had to figure out a way to get to a high-rise law office in San Francisco without my parents ever noticing I had left the suburbs. The hardest part of a covert operation is managing the logistics. I lived in Palo Alto. Evelyn Davis worked in a high-rise in the financial district of San Francisco. I did not have a driver's license yet. I had a learner's permit, but driving required supervision, and asking my parents for a ride to a trust attorney was out of the question. I had to manufacture a bulletproof alibi to disappear for 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. I leveraged my fellowship at the State Historical Records Department. I told my mother I needed to conduct an off-site field survey of local municipal archives in San Jose for my final project. Patricia barely looked up from her iPad when I asked her to sign the parental consent form. She was busy researching emergency bridge loans online. She signed the paper with a bored flick of her wrist. I took the Caltrain north instead of south. I sat by the window watching the concrete sprawl of Silicon Valley give way to the dense vertical steel of San Francisco. I carried a canvas tote bag, holding nothing but my school laptop, the heavy cardstock business card, and the letter Beatrice left me. Evelyn Davis operated out of the 32nd floor of a glass tower on Montgomery Street. The reception area was intimidatingly silent. A polished assistant ushered me into a corner office overlooking the bay. Evelyn was sitting behind a massive glass desk. She looked exactly the way an expensive San Francisco lawyer should look. Early 60s, impeccably tailored gray suit, silver hair, pulled back into a severe twist. She did not offer me a patronizing smile or ask how school was going. She evaluated me with the same sharp assessing gaze Beatrice used. You found the false bottom in the desk, Evelyn stated, resting her forearms on the glass. I nodded, sitting in the leather chair opposite her. I found the letter too. Evelyn picked up a heavy black pen, turning it slowly in her hands. Beatrice was my client for 14 years. She was a woman of singular focus. When she brought you to me 6 years ago, she had already diagnosed the disease in your family tree. She knew Richard was bleeding equity to fund Liam. She knew that when her own health began to decline, they would attempt to bleed her next. She opened a thick leather-bound folio on her desk. Inside were dozens of pages stamped with red municipal seals. 6 years ago, Beatrice initiated a strategy designed to bypass the probate process entirely. Evelyn continued, her voice level and instructional. Probate is the legal process where a deceased person's assets are distributed. It is public, it is slow, and it invites claims from next of kin. Beatrice knew your father would try to claim the Carmel estate as the primary heir, so she removed the asset from her personal estate long before she died. Evelyn slid a document across the glass desk. She established an irrevocable trust. It is a legal entity separate from her person. She transferred the title of the Carmel estate and a dedicated investment portfolio directly into that trust. The moment she signed the paperwork, she ceased to own the property. The trust owned it. And because the trust is irrevocable, Richard cannot contest it, alter it, or dismantle it. The terms are sealed. I stared at the thick paper. My name was printed on the top line under Beatrice's. You are the sole beneficiary, Harper Evelyn said softly. But there is a condition. You cannot assume control of the trust assets until you are a legal adult. Until midnight of your 18th birthday, the trust remains in a holding pattern. I act as the managing trustee, but the assets cannot be dispersed or fully secured under your name until that date. I did the mental math. 6 months. I had to survive 6 months in that house. Why did she set the condition for my 18th birthday? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why not give it to me immediately? Evelyn leaned forward, the leather of her chair creaking slightly. Because a minor cannot legally defend property. If you inherited the estate at 17, your parents would automatically become the financial conservators of your assets. They would have full legal authority to liquidate the Carmel house on your behalf, claiming it was in your best interest. Beatrice forced a delay to ensure you had the legal standing to tell them no. The brilliance of the strategy settled over me like a heavy coat. Beatrice had built a fortress, but fortresses only work if the enemy does not know where the walls are. Evelyn pulled a second document from the folio. This one looked different. It was a printed log of county records requests. This is why we need to be extremely careful over the next 6 months, Evelyn warned, tapping the paper. Your father has not been idle since the funeral. My office monitors the title activity on the Carmel parcel. In the last 3 weeks, Richard has made 4 aggressive inquiries at the Monterey County Recorder's Office. He is trying to initiate a standard probate transfer. My heart pounded against my ribs. What did the county tell him? They told him the property is not listed under Beatrice's personal name, Evelyn replied. They told him it is held by a trust, but because the trust documents are private, they did not tell him who the beneficiary is. Right now, Richard assumes the trust is just a tax shelter Beatrice set up. He assumes he is still the default heir. He is currently scrambling to find a loophole to break the trust open. Evelyn locked eyes with me. The intensity in the room spiked. He will not find a loophole, she stated firmly. But when desperate men hit a wall, they escalate. He and Liam are facing total financial collapse. They will try to find a workaround. They might try a quiet title action, or they might try something illegal. Your job is to go home and be invisible. Do not ask questions about Carmel. Do not argue with them. Let them believe they are winning. You are the only person who knows that their finish line is actually a brick wall. I took a slow breath. I was a 17-year-old girl sitting in a skyscraper, orchestrating a silent defense against my own blood. I looked at Evelyn and nodded. I can be invisible, I promised. Evelyn closed the leather folio. Good. On the night of your 18th birthday at exactly midnight, we will conduct a secure video conference. You will sign the acceptance of successor beneficiary forms. The moment your signature is verified, I will file a lease pendants notice with the county at the opening of business the next morning. That freezes the title permanently. Until then, you hold the line. I left the high-rise and walked back to the Caltrain station. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the pavement. I felt the weight of the ticking clock pressing down on my shoulders. 6 months of acting, 6 months of eating dinner across from the men who were actively trying to steal my grandmother's legacy. I rode the train back to Palo Alto and walked through the front door of my house at exactly the time I promised. Patricia was in the kitchen arguing on the phone with a credit card company about an interest rate hike. She paused to ask me how the archive survey went. "It was boring," I replied, keeping my tone flat and disinterested. "Just old municipal records." She waved her hand dismissively and went back to arguing with the representative on the phone. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom. I was successfully invisible. But staying invisible became significantly harder 3 weeks later. The escalation Evelyn warned me about arrived sooner than we anticipated. It did not start with a legal filing. It started in the dark in the garage with a conversation that proved my father and brother were willing to cross a line they could never uncross. It had been 4 weeks since my covert meeting in the financial district of San Francisco. The atmosphere inside the Palo Alto house had grown so tight, it felt like walking through deep water. The pressure of impending ruin changes the way people move. Liam was visibly unraveling. The tailored linen blazers and arrogant posture were replaced by wrinkled hooded sweatshirts and a permanent restless twitch in his jaw. He stopped talking about user acquisition pipelines at the dinner table. Instead, he started taking hushed, frantic phone calls in the backyard, pacing the perimeter of the lawn, while arguing with vendors about frozen credit lines and unpaid server hosting fees. His lifestyle optimization startup was not just failing. The venture capital money had dried up. He was weeks away from a catastrophic bankruptcy that would wipe out the remaining equity my parents had recklessly poured into his corporation. My father matched his panic with a dark, brooding silence. Richard started drinking a heavy glass of bourbon before dinner, staring blankly at the nightly news without registering the volume. His hands shook when he opened the Daily Mail. Patricia attempted to mask her anxiety by planning my upcoming 18th birthday party with a rigid, forced energy. She ordered expensive floral arrangements and booked a premium catering service we could not afford, adding the expenses to her already maxed-out credit cards. I played my part perfectly. I nodded at color swatches and pretended to care about the guest list. I was the compliant, invisible daughter they required. But my internal clock was counting down the days. The tension was unsustainable. Something had to break. Then came the second Tuesday in November. It was past 1 in the morning. I was awake, lying in bed, meticulously cataloging the historical timelines for my archive project under the glow of a small desk lamp. The house was profoundly silent. It was the kind of silence that amplifies every minor settling of the foundation. Then I heard the distinct heavy crunch of tires on the gravel near the side gate. No headlights flashed across my bedroom wall. Whoever was driving had turned their lights off before pulling into the driveway. A car door closed with a soft, deliberate click. I turned off my lamp. I threw off the covers and walked barefoot down the hallway, stepping carefully over the third floorboard that always creaked. I stopped at the top of the stairs. Below me, the heavy fireproof door leading from the kitchen to the attached garage was shut, but a thin strip of stark fluorescent light spilled out from underneath the weather stripping. I heard low, steady voices. My father, my brother, and a third man. I crept down the staircase, pressing my back flat against the drywall to avoid casting a shadow. I sat on the bottom step, pulling my knees to my chest, and leaned my ear close to the wood paneling of the garage door. The acoustics in the garage amplified their voices, bouncing the sound off the concrete floor and the metal shelving units. The third voice belonged to a man named Vince. I recognized the rough chain smoking rasp instantly. Vince was a disgraced notary public who operated out of a dying strip mall in San Jose. Richard had used him years ago for some highly questionable commercial zoning applications that required expedited signatures. Vince was a ghost in the real estate world. He was not a man you invited to your home at 1 in the morning unless you needed a legal document authenticated without a trace of a shadow. I brought the forms, Vince said, his voice flat and transactional. But I am telling you, Richard, this is a significant exposure risk. If the county clerk flags the chain of title, my notary stamp is on the line. My state license is permanently gone. I am not going to prison for your liquidity crisis. Nobody is going to flag the chain of title, Richard replied. His tone was coated in that familiar, arrogant certainty that always preceded his worst decisions. My mother lived a quiet life. She did not have complex corporate holdings. We file an affidavit of heirship stating that Liam and I are the sole surviving descendants managing the estate. We declare that no will was discovered. Then we immediately file the quitclaim deed transferring the Carmel parcel directly into Liam's corporate LLC. It is a straight-line transaction. The clerks process dozens of them every week. And the girl, Vince asked, what happens when she realizes her inheritance is gone? I stopped breathing. The concrete floor felt freezing against my bare feet. I pressed my ear harder against the door. Harper is 17, Liam scoffed. His voice was laced with profound toxic dismissal. She does not know what a quitclaim deed is. She thinks a mortgage is something you learn about in a high school economics textbook. She spends her weekends reading historical journals. She is blind to the mechanics of wealth. She is not a factor in this equation. We execute the transfer the morning after her birthday. Richard explained, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial whisper. Patricia is throwing a large party for her the night before. The house will be chaotic. Harper will be distracted opening gifts and hanging out with her neighbors. She will probably sleep until noon. By the time she wakes up, Liam and I will be at the county recorder office in Monterey. We file the forged paperwork right when the doors open at 8 in the morning. The title transfers cleanly. We take the stamped deed straight to Marcus Thorne. The bridge loan funds clear the escrow account by Friday. We save the company. Harper never even notices the property changed hands until it is far too late for her to contest it. They had mapped out the exact geometry of their betrayal. They were banking their entire survival on my perceived ignorance. I reached into my pajama pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I did not record them because I planned to burst through the door and demand an explanation. A sudden confrontation is a tactical error. It gives the enemy a chance to pivot. It gives them an opportunity to lie, to twist the narrative and destroy the physical evidence. I opened the voice memo application. I pressed the red record button. I slid the phone under the crack of the garage door, resting the microphone directly on the cold concrete floor. I recorded them because an archivist knows that oral history is compelling, but hard digital audio is undeniable. You need to make sure the signature on the affidavit perfectly matches her old tax returns. Vince warned, the sound of thick papers shuffling echoing through the garage. The clerks in Monterey are meticulous when it comes to coastal properties. I spent 3 hours practicing my mother's signature yesterday, Richard said smoothly. It is an exact match. Just stamp the document, Vince. I will wire the $10,000 to your offshore account the moment the bridge loan clears. Do not overthink it. $10,000. My father was bribing a corrupt notary to commit forgery. He was actively planning to commit a state felony to steal a $3.5 million coastal estate from his own daughter. The sheer criminality of it settled over me like a heavy winter coat. They were no longer just greedy parents making poor financial decisions. They were criminals executing a coordinated conspiracy. I listened as the heavy thud of a rubber stamp hit a wooden work table. Once, twice. The deal was struck. The crime was formalized in ink. I pulled my phone back from under the door. I saved the audio file, named it with the current date, uploaded it immediately to a secure cloud server, and locked the device. I stood up from the bottom step. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt the cold, crystalline clarity of a person who has just been handed the exact coordinates of an enemy strike. I walked back up the dark staircase, my bare feet silent on the wood. I returned to my bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my mattress. I opened my encrypted messaging application. I selected Evelyn Davis from the contact list. I typed 2 words and hit send. They are accelerating. The weeks following the garage confession required a level of discipline I did not know I possessed. Knowing a strike is imminent changes the oxygen in the room. Every interaction became a tactical assessment. My father's casual questions about my schedule felt like interrogations. My brother's sudden attempts at making small talk felt like reconnaissance. Evelyn Davis was clear. They are accelerating. That meant I needed to accelerate too. The first vulnerability I had to secure was my capital. The $5,000 educational grant from the State Archive Fellowship was currently sitting in a joint checking account I shared with my mother. In the state of California, a joint account means either party has full unilateral access to the funds. If Liam's bridge loan stalled, or if Patricia needed to cover an unexpected catering bill for my fake birthday party, they could drain my account in 3 seconds from an application on their phone. I waited until the following Monday. I skipped my afternoon study hall and walked 3 miles to a local credit union. It was a small regional bank that had zero affiliation with the massive national chain my parents used. I sat across from a loan officer and explained that I needed to open a student checking account. I transferred $4,900, leaving exactly $100 in the joint account, so it would not trigger a zero balance alert. I set the new account to paperless billing and linked it to a secure encrypted email address I created specifically for this purpose. My money was safe. But money is only one type of leverage. The next vulnerability was physical. My parents were building a narrative. They needed me to be the compliant, distracted teenager until the forged deed was recorded. But what happens after the deed is recorded? What happens when the Monterey County clerk hands Richard a stamped document transferring the Carmel estate to Liam? I knew my father. The moment he believed he had won, the facade would drop. He would not need me anymore. The house in Palo Alto would become a hostile environment. They would demand I turn over any remaining keys or access codes Beatrice had given me. If I refused, they would leverage the roof over my head. They would threaten to kick me out, or worse, they would hold my personal belongings hostage to force my compliance. I needed to extract my most valuable possessions before the trap snapped shut. I enlisted the help of my closest friend, Maya. Maya was 18, lived 3 streets over, and had a driver's license. I did not tell her about the forgery or the trust. I simply told her the tension in my house was escalating, and I needed a safe place to store some sentimental items. Maya did not push for details. She drove me to a self-storage facility on the edge of town and rented a small, climate-controlled locker under her name. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled my bedroom. I moved like a ghost. I only packed items when the house was completely empty. I started with the irreplaceable things. The vintage leather journal Beatrice gave me for my 14th birthday, the custom silver letter opener from her mahogany desk, my archive fellowship portfolio, my high school diploma jacket. I packed them into nondescript cardboard boxes and carried them out the back door, loading them into the trunk of Maya's car during our study sessions. I left my room looking untouched. I kept my closet full of clothes I did not care about. I left my laptop charger plugged into the wall. I maintained the illusion of a teenager deeply rooted in her childhood bedroom. The physical preparation was exhausting, but the psychological endurance was agonizing. We still ate dinner together every night. Patricia insisted on it. It was part of her performance. She would sit at the head of the long oak dining table, pouring organic white wine and asking us about our days with a bright, brittle enthusiasm. Liam was the star of these dinners. He sat across from me, cutting his steak with precise, confident motions. The restless twitch in his jaw was gone, replaced by a terrifying, smug certainty. He had convinced himself that the forged quitclaim deed was already a reality. "We are finalizing the beta launch for the premium tier next month," Liam announced one evening, leaning back in his chair. "Marcus Thorne is flying in from New York to review the expansion strategy. The bridge loan is basically a formality at this point. We are projecting a 200% increase in user engagement by Q3. Richard raised his wine glass, a proud smile stretching across his face. To expansion, he said. Patricia clapped her hands together. I am so proud of you, Liam. You have worked so hard for this. I sat at the table eating my vegetables, watching the performance. They were celebrating a corporate victory funded by a felony they had not yet committed. They were raising glasses to a future built on my ruin. Harper. Patricia chirped, turning her bright artificial gaze toward me. Have you thought about the playlist for the party? We have 50 confirmed RSVPs. The caterer needs the final menu selections by Friday. Do you prefer the salmon or the filet? I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who was actively planning a lavish distraction to keep me sedated while my father and brother stole my inheritance. I felt a profound, heavy grief settle into the center of my chest. It was not the sharp, hot pain of betrayal. It was the cold, hollow realization that I was an orphan with living parents. They did not view me as a daughter. They did not view me as a sister. I was a disposable asset. I was a minor obstacle on the spreadsheet of Liam's success. I swallowed the grief. I buried it next to the fellowship letter they ignored. I mastered the art of the blank face. The salmon sounds perfect, Mom, I replied, my voice light and agreeable. And I will send the playlist to the DJ tomorrow. Thank you for doing all of this. Patricia smiled, satisfied that her smokescreen was working. The dinners continued. The party preparations escalated, the house filled with the smell of expensive floral arrangements and the sound of delivery drivers dropping off rented patio heaters. The tension stretched thinner and thinner like a wire about to snap. I held the line. I maintained the illusion. But the illusion required maintenance, and Patricia was not content to just let me sit quietly. She needed to ensure I was fully compliant. She needed to test the depth of my ignorance. 3 days before the party, Patricia cornered me in the kitchen. The catering staff was not there. Richard and Liam were out. We were completely alone. And Patricia dropped the soft maternal act, shifting into a highly calculated manipulation that proved she was just as dangerous as the men in the garage. 3 days before I turned 18, the house in Palo Alto smelled like imported eucalyptus and creeping panic. The party rentals were arriving in shifts. A catering company delivered crystal glassware and silver chafing dishes in heavy padded crates, stacking them neatly along the hallway baseboards. Patricia orchestrated the chaos like a general directing a battlefield. She carried a leather clipboard checking off vendor invoices and issuing sharp commands to delivery drivers. But beneath the frantic event planning, a darker, quieter operation was taking place. Patricia was not just the party planner. She was the psychological enforcer. Richard and Liam were handling the legal forgery in the shadows, but Patricia was tasked with managing the human element. Her job was to ensure I remained sedated. It was late Wednesday afternoon. Richard and Liam were at the corporate office in the city meeting with a bankruptcy consultant they thought I did not know about. I was sitting at the granite kitchen island drinking a glass of ice water and reviewing my history notes for a final exam. The house had briefly cleared of vendors. The silence felt heavy. Patricia walked in from the back patio. She set her clipboard down on the counter. She let out a long, deliberate sigh. It was a perfectly calibrated sound. It was designed to invite sympathy. She poured herself a cup of black coffee and pulled out a wooden stool directly across from me. She folded her hands together. She looked at me with an expression of deep manufactured vulnerability. Harper, she began, her voice soft and brittle. You are practically an adult now. You are turning 18 this weekend. I feel like I can finally talk to you about adult responsibilities. I kept my eyes on my notebook for a second before looking up. I gave a slight, encouraging nod. I was utilizing a defense mechanism I had perfected over the years. I call it the blank mirror. You give the manipulator nothing to work with, reflecting only what they want to see. Patricia reached across the cold granite and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was freezing. We are going through a bit of a transition right now, she continued, lowering her voice, as if someone might overhear us in the empty house. Liam is on the verge of something incredible with his company. He is so close to securing a major national partnership. But the tech industry is brutal. We are facing a temporary cash flow squeeze, just a short bottleneck. It is nothing serious, but it requires the family to pull together. She paused, letting the concept of family unity settle over the conversation. Family unity was a weapon she wielded with expert precision. It meant obedience. It meant sacrifice without asking questions. Patricia squeezed my hand. Her thumb rubbed in slow circles against my knuckles. "I want to talk to you about your grandmother," she said. A spike of adrenaline hit my chest, but I kept my face entirely still. I blinked slowly, projecting nothing but mild curiosity. "Beatrice was a wonderful woman," Patricia murmured, her tone dripping with condescending pity. "But we all know she was not thinking clearly at the end. Her mind was slipping. She isolated herself out on the coast and lost touch with reality. It happens to older people. They forget how the world works." I stared into my mother's eyes. I thought about Beatrice sitting at her mahogany desk reviewing municipal bonds with surgical precision. I thought about the hidden envelope and the irrevocable trust. My grandmother's mind was sharper on her final day than my mother's had ever been. But Patricia needed to rewrite history. She needed to paint Beatrice as a confused, wealthy old woman who did not understand modern finance. Beatrice always meant for the Carmel estate to be a safety net for the entire family. Patricia lied, her voice steady and smooth. She wanted it to be the foundation that kept us all secure. She just never got around to updating the paperwork before she got sick. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Patricia was not just participating in the theft of my inheritance. She was trying to convince me that the theft was actually my grandmother's dying wish. Patricia leaned closer. The smell of her expensive floral perfume was overwhelming. "Because the paperwork is outdated, your father and I have to restructure the estate manually to secure a short-term bridge loan for Liam. The bank requires some standard liability releases from the surviving family members. It is just a routine legal formality to show that we are all on the same page." She offered me a warm, motherly smile. It did not reach her eyes. "Since you become a legal adult on Saturday, we are going to have you sign a generic family release document," Patricia explained gently. "We can do it right before the party starts. It will be a nice moment, your first official act as an adult helping your brother cross the finish line." I looked down at her hand resting on mine. I understood the trap perfectly. The forged quitclaim deed Richard and Liam planned to file was their primary weapon. But my parents were terrified of loose ends. They wanted me to sign a vague legal waiver releasing my rights to contest any family financial decisions. If I ever discovered their forgery down the line, they would produce this generic release document in court and claim I had consented to the restructuring. It was their insurance policy. It was a gag order disguised as a rite of passage. If I asked to read this document, Patricia would become defensive. If I refused to sign it, she would immediately alert Richard, and they would know I was a threat. They might try to accelerate their filing or lock me out of the house. I had to defuse the bomb without touching the wires. I had to give Patricia the exact response she required to feel secure. I gently pulled my hand out from under hers to turn a page in my notebook. I looked up and offered her a soft, compliant smile. "Of course, Mom," I said, my voice bright and agreeable. "Whatever helps Liam get through the bottleneck. I will sign whatever you need me to sign on Saturday." The relief that washed over Patricia was instantaneous. The manufactured vulnerability vanished from her face. Her shoulders dropped. The brittle, frantic energy returned to her movements. She stood up, grabbed her leather clipboard off the counter, and smoothed the front of her silk blouse. "Thank you, Harper," she chirped, her tone returning to its normal transactional pitch. "You have always been such a good, easy child. We are so lucky you understand." She turned her back to me and walked out of the kitchen to check on the floral deliveries arriving in the living room. I sat alone at the kitchen island. A good, easy child. That was how she defined me. A girl who asked no questions and handed over her future without a fight. A daughter who was willing to set herself on fire to keep her brother warm. I picked up my pen and stared at my history notes. The ink blurred slightly on the page. My mother had just looked me in the eye and tried to emotionally manipulate me into signing away a coastal estate. She used my grandmother's memory as a prop. The party was only 3 days away. The house was filling with decorations, expensive food, and string lights, but it felt like a prison preparing for an execution. They thought they had secured my surrender. They believed the generic release form would cover their tracks and keep me quiet. They had no idea they had just guaranteed their own destruction. The pieces were moving exactly as Evelyn Davis predicted. The clock ticked closer to Saturday. The illusion was holding. Now I just had to survive the party. My 18th birthday party looked exactly the way a Silicon Valley success story is supposed to look. The caterers arrived at 4 in the afternoon. They set up carving stations and a raw bar on the back patio. A jazz trio tuned their instruments near the pool. Patricia wore a silk cocktail dress and greeted the arriving guests with an aggressive, sparkling enthusiasm. She had invited 50 people. Most of them were neighbors, members of their country club, and potential investors Richard was still trying to court. They were not there for me. They were there to serve as an audience for my parents' performance of stability. I wore a simple navy blazer over a white dress. I stood near the dessert table holding a glass of sparkling cider and played the part of the grateful, quiet daughter. The dramatic irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Everyone in the backyard thought they were attending a celebration of my entry into adulthood. I was the only person who knew they were actually attending a wake for my family's financial future. Richard stood near the outdoor fireplace holding a glass of scotch. He was holding court with a group of men wearing expensive polo shirts. He was laughing, gesturing expansively. He looked like a man who had already won. He believed the forged quitclaim deed secured with a corrupt notary stamp was safely tucked away in his home office, safe ready to be filed at 8 the next morning. He believed the generic family release document Patricia had forced me to sign 2 hours earlier had legally sterilized me. I had signed it without hesitation. Patricia placed it in front of me on the kitchen counter, her eyes wide with that manufactured vulnerability. I did not ask to read the fine print. I did not ask for a copy. I simply picked up a pen and signed my name on the dotted line. It was a meaningless piece of paper. You cannot sign away rights to a trust you do not legally control yet, and a generic family waiver does not override a forged deed. It was a placebo, and I let them swallow it. At 7 o'clock, Richard tapped a silver spoon against his scotch glass. The jazz trio stopped playing. The 50 guests turned their attention toward the patio. Richard walked to the center of the crowd, putting his arm around Patricia's waist. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Richard began, his voice booming and confident. "Tonight we are celebrating a milestone. Our daughter Harper is officially an adult." The guests offered polite, scattered applause. I smiled and gave a small wave. But milestones are also a time to reflect on what matters most. Richard continued, his tone turning serious and resonant. "In this part of the world, it is easy to get caught up in the hustle. We are surrounded by innovation and disruption. But at the end of the day, the only thing that truly disrupts hardship is family. We stick together. When one of us faces a challenge, we all step up. We share the burden, we share the success. That is what the Wilson family is built on." It was a masterful performance. He was standing in front of 50 people delivering a sermon on family loyalty while actively plotting to steal $3.5 million from his own daughter. He was laying the public groundwork for the narrative he would spin later. When Liam's company miraculously secured a massive bridge loan the following week, Richard would tell these same neighbors that the family had pulled together. He would claim they had restructured their assets as a united front. He was making them all unwitting accomplices to his lie. Richard raised his glass. "To Harper, and to the future." The crowd echoed the toast. "To Harper." I raised my cider and drank. "To the future." As the crowd dispersed back to the raw bar and the carving stations, Liam intercepted me near the edge of the pool. He was holding a glass of champagne, his posture relaxed and arrogant. The frantic twitch that had plagued him for weeks was entirely gone. He had regained the smug certainty of a golden child who had never faced a consequence he could not buy his way out of. "Happy birthday, little sister," Liam said, pulling me into a quick one-armed hug. "You survived high school." "Thank you, Liam," I replied, keeping my voice even and light. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice so the passing guests could not hear. Listen, I know Dad gave the big speech, but I want to talk to you tomorrow. I have a special business proposition for you, something that brings you into the fold. We are making big moves next quarter, and I want you to be a part of it. I looked at him. The sheer audacity of his lie was almost impressive. He did not have a business proposition. He had a forged deed. He was trying to preemptively manage my reaction, for when I eventually discovered the Carmel estate was gone, he was going to offer me a token job at his failing startup, or a meaningless title on his board of directors, framing it as an inclusionary gesture. He was trying to buy my silence with fake corporate equity. That sounds great, Liam, I said, offering him the blank mirror smile. I cannot wait to hear about it. He patted my shoulder, satisfied, and walked away to join Richard near the fireplace. I turned my back to the party and looked out at the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. Inside the right pocket of my navy blazer, my hand rested against the hard plastic edge of my phone. The screen was dark, but the browser was already queued up to the secure encrypted portal linked directly to Evelyn Davis's server. I had the two-factor authentication code memorized. I had practiced the login sequence until I could do it with my eyes closed. The sun set. The string lights glowed brighter against the California night. The party stretched on a relentless performance of affluent ease. I mingled. I thanked Mrs. Gable for the cashmere sweater she brought. I listened to Patricia boast to a neighbor about Liam's upcoming expansion into the European market. I ate a slice of my own birthday cake, a red velvet creation that tasted like ash in my mouth. Every interaction felt like moving through a thick, invisible syrup. The adrenaline was a cold, sharp ache behind my ribs. I had spent 6 months preparing for this exact night. 6 months of hiding the truth, mastering the blank face, and cataloging every lie my family told. I had moved my most valuable possessions into a storage unit. I had secured my personal funds. I had recorded their criminal conspiracy in the garage. I had built the trap. Now I just had to wait for the clock to run out. At 11:30, the catering staff began clearing the tables. The jazz trio packed up their instruments. The guests started saying their extended polite goodbyes. Richard and Patricia stood by the front door shaking hands and accepting compliments on a beautiful evening. Liam had already retreated to the living room, scrolling through his phone with a satisfied smirk. I excused myself, claiming exhaustion. Patricia kissed my cheek, her eyes already scanning the room for the next vendor she needed to pay. Richard clapped me on the shoulder, wishing me a good night. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. The click of the lock was loud in the silent hallway. I walked over to my desk and sat down. I pulled my phone out of my blazer pocket and placed it flat on the wooden surface. I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand. It read 11:45, 15 minutes. 15 minutes until my status changed from a minor under their control to a legal adult with unilateral authority over a coastal estate. 15 minutes until the irrevocable trust activated. 15 minutes until the game they thought they were playing officially ended. I did not pace the room. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still, watching the numbers change. The house below me grew quiet. The catering vans drove away. The heavy oak front door shut and locked. I heard the muffled sounds of Richard and Patricia talking in the kitchen, their voices relaxed and victorious. I heard Liam walk down the hall to his bedroom, his footsteps heavy and confident. They thought the hard part was over. They thought they had successfully navigated the bottleneck. They believed they were going to wake up tomorrow, drive to Monterey, and save their crumbling empire. The clock ticked to 11:55. I opened the encrypted portal on my phone. The login screen glowed blue against the dark wood of my desk. I entered my credentials. The system authenticated my identity. A secure video conferencing link appeared on the screen, pulsing with a green light. Evelyn Davis was waiting on the other side. The trap was primed. The digital numbers on my nightstand clock shifted from 11:59 to 12:00. Midnight. I did not feel a sudden rush of maturity. My bones did not ache. The air in my childhood bedroom remained exactly the same. But in the eyes of the state of California, an invisible, profound threshold had just been crossed. I was no longer a minor. I was an adult. The legal barrier that my parents had relied upon to keep me powerless had just evaporated into the dark room. I sat forward in my desk chair and clicked the green pulsing link on my laptop screen. The secure portal loaded instantly. The video feed connected and Evelyn Davis appeared on my monitor. She was sitting in her San Francisco office. Behind her, the city skyline was a grid of illuminated windows against the black sky. Evelyn was wearing a crisp white blouse, her silver hair pulled back flawlessly. She did not look like a person who had stayed awake until midnight to conduct a meeting. She looked like a general commanding a night watch. Evelyn built her career dismantling hostile corporate takeovers. She approached family trust disputes with the exact same tactical coldness she used against Fortune 500 executives. She did not view my parents as misguided family members. She viewed them as hostile actors attempting to raid a protected asset, and she handled hostile actors by burying them in paperwork they could not outrun. "Happy birthday, Harper," Evelyn said. Her voice was clear and sharp through the laptop speakers. "We are on the clock. Are you ready to assume control?" "I am ready," I replied. Evelyn shared her screen. A high-resolution PDF document filled my monitor. The header read, "Acceptance of Successor Beneficiary." It was a dense 3-page legal instrument filled with statutory references and identifying codes. "I am going to walk you through the mechanics of what you are about to execute," Evelyn explained, highlighting the first paragraph with her cursor. "This document officially invokes Article 4, Section 2 of the Beatrice Wilson Irrevocable Trust. For the past 6 years, I have acted as the managing trustee. I held the keys, but I did not own the car. The assets were held in a legally suspended state, waiting for the designated beneficiary to reach the age of majority." She scrolled to the second page, highlighting a long list of parcel numbers and account codes. "These are the Schedule A assets," Evelyn continued. "The coastal estate in Carmel by the sea, the diversified investment portfolios, the liquid cash reserves. By signing this document today, you formally accept fiduciary responsibility and claim these assets. The holding pattern ends. The trust recognizes you as the ultimate irrevocable authority over the property. Once your signature is verified, Richard and Liam possess zero legal standing to alter leverage or interact with the estate." Evelyn released the screen share. An electronic signature prompt appeared on my local display. A small flashing yellow box pointed to the bottom line of the third page. I stared at the flashing box. I thought about the forged quitclaim deed sitting in my father's home office, safe down the hall. I thought about the corrupt notary Vince stamping his fraudulent seal on my inheritance in the middle of the night. I thought about the generic family release form Patricia had tried to use as a gag order just a few hours earlier. They had spent weeks building a house of cards. I typed my full legal name into the electronic signature field. Harper Elaine Wilson. I clicked the Submit button. The portal processed the data. A green checkmark appeared on the screen, accompanied by a digital timestamp. 12:04. The document was sealed, encrypted, and legally binding. "It is done," Evelyn stated. "You are officially the controlling beneficiary. Now we secure the perimeter." Evelyn typed rapidly on her own keyboard. The sound of her keystrokes was rapid and rhythmic. "Your father assumes the municipal government operates on a paper-based timeline," Evelyn said, her eyes scanning her secondary monitor. "He assumes he can walk into the Monterey County Recorder office at 8 in the morning, hand them a forged piece of paper, and win the race. He does not understand modern title defense." She opened a new software application. I recognized the official seal of Monterey County at the top of the interface. "I hold a specialized commercial account with the county electronic recording system," Evelyn explained. "It allows me to submit legal instruments directly into their digital hopper. I am currently uploading a lis pendens against the Carmel parcel. A lis pendens is a formal notice of pendency of action. It is the real estate equivalent of dropping a concrete barricade in the middle of a highway. It serves as a public declaration that the property title is subject to a superseding legal claim. The county clerks do not arrive at their desks until 8 o'clock," Evelyn continued, her voice maintaining that instructional, detached rhythm. But the electronic queue is always open. I am submitting the list pendants right now. It is time-stamped at 12:08 in the morning. It will be the very first document sitting in the queue when the municipal servers boot up for the business day. I watched her screen as a status bar loaded, followed by a confirmation receipt. The barricade was dropped. When the head clerk logs into the system at exactly 8 o'clock, they must clear the overnight electronic queue before they can process physical walk-in requests, Evelyn said. My list pendants will strike the public ledger before the front doors of the building even unlock. The caramel title will be flagged with a hard stop. What happens when my father walks up to the counter? I asked. Evelyn offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. He will present his fraudulent quitclaim deed to the clerk. The clerk will type the parcel number into their database. The system will immediately flash a warning. The clerk will inform Richard that the property is held by an irrevocable trust, and a formal legal notice was recorded on the title earlier that same morning. The clerk will reject the forged deed due to a massive chain of title discrepancy. They will hand the paperwork back to your father, and his theft will die right there on the counter. The sheer efficiency of the trap was breathtaking. I did not have to stand in front of my father and argue. I did not have to hire private investigators or stage a dramatic intervention. I just had to utilize the quiet, invisible machinery of the law. The government itself was going to dismantle his conspiracy, and he would not even see the blade coming. Evelyn finalized the uploads and locked her workstation. Get some sleep, Harper, she said softly. The morning is going to be loud. Your father is going to realize his bridge loan is dead. He is going to realize his son's company is bankrupt. And he is going to realize the quiet daughter he thought he could manipulate was the one holding the pen. I thanked her. I ended the video call. The screen went dark, casting my bedroom back into shadows. I closed my laptop and set it on the desk. I walked over to my bed and lay down on top of the covers. I stared at the ceiling. The house was dead silent. Down the hall, Richard and Liam were asleep. They were likely dreaming of venture capital term sheets and corporate expansion. They were resting peacefully secure in their belief that they had outsmarted the world. They did not know their financial future was already a corpse. They did not know the fatal blow had been struck without a single drop of blood being spilled. I closed my eyes. The tension that had gripped my chest for 6 months finally released, evaporating into the cool night air. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel fear. I felt the profound, heavy safety of a person who has finally reached the high ground. I let the silence of the house wash over me. I fell asleep quickly, resting up for the collision I knew was waiting for them at dawn. I woke up at 6 in the morning. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in my bedroom blinds, casting thin yellow stripes across the hardwood floor. It was my 18th birthday. I lay still for a moment, cataloging the physical sensations of the house. No hurried whispers in the hallway, no catering trucks idling in the driveway. The Palo Alto suburbs were quiet, wrapped in a thick, early-morning marine layer. I stood up and stretched. The suffocating dread that had lived in my chest for half a year was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp focus. I took a shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering exhaustion of the party. I dressed in a pair of faded denim jeans and an oversized gray sweater Beatrice bought me during a trip to Boston. It felt appropriate to wear something she chose today. I walked downstairs. The aftermath of the celebration was visible through the sliding glass doors. Deflated silver balloons drifted across the patio. Stacks of rented folding chairs sat near the pool, the remnants of a fake milestone. I turned away from the glass and walked into the kitchen. I ground fresh coffee beans. The loud mechanical whir of the grinder seemed to cut through the lingering tension in the house. I poured the dark roast into a ceramic mug, picked up a thick biography of the Romanov dynasty, and sat at the granite island. I flipped to chapter 4. I did not read the words. I was just setting the stage. A teenage girl enjoying a lazy Saturday morning with a book. The perfect picture of harmless ignorance. At 7:15, the sharp footsteps started on the second floor. It was not the shuffling gait of people waking up on a weekend. It was the rhythmic cadence of leather dress shoes striking the hardwood. I kept my eyes on the pages of my book. Richard came down the stairs first. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a navy silk tie. He carried a slim leather briefcase in his right hand. The scent of his cedar cologne filled the kitchen before he even crossed the threshold. Liam followed close behind. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a fitted black turtleneck. His hair was styled perfectly. The arrogant smirk had returned to his face, permanently fixed, replacing the hollow panic that had haunted him for weeks. They looked like two executives preparing to ring the bell at the stock exchange. They did not look like men preparing to file a forged quitclaim deed with a fake notary stamp. Patricia trailed behind them, wearing a silk robe, holding a hand to her temple. She looked exhausted from hosting 50 people, but she managed to summon her artificial bright tone. "Good morning, birthday girl," Patricia chirped, walking over to pour herself a cup of coffee. "How does it feel to be an adult?" "It feels quiet," I replied, offering her a polite, empty smile. Richard set his leather briefcase on the far end of the granite counter. He did not open it. He kept his hand resting protectively on the handle. Inside that case was the single piece of paper they believed would save Liam's startup and erase their crushing debt. "We are going to let you enjoy a peaceful morning, Harper," Richard said. His voice was smooth, projecting a paternal warmth that made my skin crawl. "Liam and I have to run up to Monterey for a few hours. We have some boring municipal errands to take care of regarding some old tax filings. Administrative nonsense." Liam leaned against the refrigerator, tossing a green apple into the air and catching it with one hand. "We will be back by noon," Liam added, taking a loud bite of the fruit. "Then we can take you out for a proper birthday lunch. Anywhere you want to go. My treat." He offered to pay for lunch using funds he intended to steal from me. The layers of his deception were staggering, but I did not react. I utilized the blank mirror. I looked at my brother and my father, projecting the exact image of the naive, trusting daughter they required. "That sounds great," I said, turning a page in my biography. "Good luck with the errands. Drive safely." Richard nodded, satisfied. He picked up his briefcase. He and Liam walked toward the door leading to the garage. They moved with a frantic, eager energy, like predators tracking a wounded animal. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They believed the generic family release form I signed the previous afternoon was an ironclad insurance policy against any future disputes. They thought the path was clear. The solid fireproof door clicked shut behind them. A moment later, the deep hum of Richard's luxury sedan vibrated through the walls. I listened as the garage door rolled open. The tires crunched down the driveway, the sound fading as they turned onto the main suburban street heading toward the Pacific Coast Highway. Patricia sighed, leaning against the counter. "Men and their paperwork," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "I am going back to bed. Do not wake me up before 11. She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone on the first floor. I closed my book. I looked at the digital clock mounted on the stainless steel oven. 7:30 in the morning. Monterey was a 45-minute drive from Palo Alto without traffic. Richard was a fast driver. They would arrive at the county recorder office with time to spare. I visualized their journey. I pictured them cruising down the coastal highway, the ocean visible out the passenger window, celebrating their impending victory. I imagined Liam checking his phone, reviewing the term sheets for his bridge loan, mentally spending the $500,000 Marcus Thorne promised him. I looked down at the silver watch on my left wrist. It was a vintage piece Beatrice gave me when I turned 16. I watched the second hand sweep across the dial. 7:45. They were likely pulling into the municipal parking lot. Richard would find a spot near the entrance. He would grab his briefcase, feeling the weight of the forged deed inside. 7:50. They were walking toward the glass doors of the county building. The morning air in Monterey would be crisp and salty, just like the air at the Carmel estate. They would stand near the entrance, waiting for the security guard to unlock the doors. 7:55. The clerks inside were settling at their desks. They were turning on their monitors, logging into the municipal network. The digital queue was loading on their screens. I traced the edge of my coffee mug with my index finger. My heart maintained a steady, even rhythm. The fear was gone. the anxiety was gone. Evelyn Davis had explained the mechanics of the trap with clinical precision. She told me the electronic list pendants would be the very first document to strike the public ledger when the system booted up. The second hand ticked upward. 7:58, 7:59, 8 o'clock. The doors unlocked. The digital barricade dropped. The title to the Carmel estate was permanently frozen under the authority of the irrevocable trust. My inheritance was sealed in a vault of untouchable code. I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee. Somewhere in a sterile government building 45 miles away, my father was stepping up to a counter. He was opening his leather briefcase. He was handing a piece of fraudulent paper to a county clerk. He was smiling. He had exactly 3 minutes left to believe he was a wealthy man. I know the exact sequence of events that unfolded inside the Monterey County Recorder Office. I know because Evelyn Davis is thorough and the municipal clerks leave detailed digital footprints when a citizen attempts to override a locked parcel. Later, during the formal legal proceedings, the security footage and the clerk's official incident report painted a pristine picture of my father's downfall. The county building in Monterey is a monument to bureaucratic indifference. It sits near the coast, but the interior is devoid of natural beauty. The floors are laid with scuffed beige linoleum. The air smells of stale coffee ozone from overworked copy machines and harsh cleaning supplies. It is a room where citizens wait in plastic chairs to pay tax liens, register deeds, and argue over property boundaries. It is not a place that respects expensive tailored suits or country club charm. Richard and Liam walked through the double glass doors at exactly 10 minutes past 8. They were the third and fourth people to pull a numbered paper ticket from the red dispenser near the entrance. They took their seats in the waiting area. Liam spent the wait checking his smartphone, scrolling through a string of unread messages from his lead investor, Marcus Thorne. Liam was likely calculating the exact hour he would call Marcus to confirm the bridge loan. He was measuring the influx of cash, imagining the new hiring push for his tech startup, secure in the delusion that his corporate survival was guaranteed. Richard sat next to him, resting his leather briefcase on his knees. His fingers drummed a light, confident rhythm against the brass clasps. He felt the weight of the forged documents inside. The false affidavit of heirship, the quitclaim deed stamped with Vince the corrupt notary's illegal seal. Richard had spent weeks orchestrating this exact moment, navigating the risks and suppressing his own daughter to ensure his legacy survived. He believed he was crossing the finish line. At 8:20, a digital chime echoed through the lobby. A red LED screen above window 4 flashed their number. Richard stood up, smoothing the front of his charcoal suit jacket. Liam followed, slipping his phone into his pocket. They approached the glass partition. The clerk sitting behind window 4 was a woman named Sylvia. She had worked in civil records for 20 years. She wore thick reading glasses on a beaded chain and a practical gray cardigan. She did not care about my father's expensive watch or my brother's custom linen blazer. She only cared about processing the paperwork in her tray. "Good morning," Richard said, deploying his deep, resonant voice. He offered Sylvia a warm, practiced smile designed to disarm and flatter. "We have a rather urgent property transfer to file. A simple family restructuring. We are hoping to get the deed recorded and stamped this morning." Sylvia did not return the smile. She held out her hand. Richard unlocked his briefcase. He pulled out the crisp, heavy stock papers. He slid the affidavit and the forged quitclaim deed through the narrow gap at the bottom of the glass partition. Sylvia adjusted her reading glasses. She picked up the documents. She did not read the signatures first. Clerks are trained to follow the digital trail. She glanced at the 10-digit parcel number printed at the top of the page. She turned her attention to her dual monitors, her fingers resting on a weathered keyboard. The clatter of her typing was sharp and rhythmic in the quiet room. She inputted the parcel number into the county database. She hit the enter key. Richard rested his elbows on the laminate counter, leaning forward with the relaxed posture of a man waiting for his change at a coffee shop. Liam stood beside him, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, eager to get back to his car and make the call to New York. Behind the glass, Sylvia stopped typing. The steady rhythm of her workflow broke. She stared at the primary monitor. She leaned closer to the screen, reading the text generated by the database. She picked up the forged deed from her desk, looking at the listed grantor, then looked back at the digital ledger. She read the screen a second time just to be sure. The database did not show a standard unencumbered residential property. The system flashed a bright yellow status bar across the top of the interface. The property was flagged with a hard stop. Sylvia sat back in her chair. She gathered the forged papers, tapping the edges against her desk to align them perfectly. She looked up at Richard. The bureaucratic indifference in her eyes had hardened into a wall of procedural authority. "I cannot record this deed, Sir," Sylvia stated. Her voice was flat and unyielding. Richard blinked. The practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he forced it back into place. He let out a short, dismissive chuckle. "There must be a clerical error," Richard said smoothly. "It is a straightforward transfer between heirs. I am the sole surviving son. The affidavit of heirship is attached right there." Sylvia slid the documents back through the gap in the glass. The paper scraped softly against the laminate counter. "It is not a clerical error," Sylvia replied. "The chain of title on this parcel does not match your filing. This property is not held in an individual estate. It is held by an irrevocable trust. It was transferred 6 years ago." The color drained from my father's face. The blood rushed out of his cheeks, leaving a gray, hollow pallor behind. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the counter, slowly curled into tight fists. He stared at the clerk, his brain struggling to process a reality that defied every assumption he had made. "A trust." Liam interrupted, his voice pitching higher, losing its arrogant edge. "That is impossible. My grandmother did not have a trust. She owned the house outright." "I am looking at the county ledger," Sylvia said, tapping her fingernail against her monitor. "The Beatrice Wilson Irrevocable Trust is the sole legal owner of the Carmel parcel. Furthermore, the system shows a formal lease pendens was recorded against this exact title at 8 o'clock this morning. The property is currently under the jurisdiction of the managing trustee." Richard felt his lungs tighten. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. A lease pendens. A legal barricade dropped on the title just 20 minutes before he walked through the door. The timing was too precise. It was a targeted strike. Who filed it? Richard demanded, his voice dropping, the charm entirely shifting into a raw, desperate growl. "Who is the trustee?" Sylvia frowned at his tone, but she read the name off the screen. "Evelyn Davis, a trust attorney out of San Francisco, and the filing indicates the successor beneficiary assumed full legal control as of midnight last night." The words hit my father like physical blows. Midnight last night. The exact moment his quiet, compliant teenage daughter became a legal adult. The puzzle pieces snapped together in his mind with terrifying clarity. The missing records, the silence, the generic release form she had signed so easily the day before. She had not signed it out of obedience. She signed it because she knew it was worthless. Harper had known about the estate. She had known about their forgery. She had sat at the dinner table eating the meals they bought, watching them build a criminal conspiracy, and she had waited for the precise legal second to drop the guillotine. Liam took a step back from the counter. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. He looked at the rejected papers lying on the laminate surface. He did not see ink and paper. He saw the death of his startup. He saw the angry face of Marcus Thorne demanding answers. He saw the civil lawsuits, the bankruptcy filings, and the end of his gilded life in Silicon Valley. His bridge loan was dead. His company was a corpse. "We need to speak to a supervisor," Richard said, his voice shaking. "You need to override this flag. I have a notarized deed. I cannot override a recorded trust and a formal notice of pendency." Sylvia stated, her tone final. "Presenting a quitclaim deed that contradicts an established trust is a serious discrepancy, sir. I suggest you contact this attorney, Evelyn Davis, to resolve your internal dispute, but you cannot record these documents here today. Step aside, please." Sylvia reached out and pressed a button on her desk. The digital chime echoed through the lobby again. Number 15. Richard stood frozen at window 4. He stared at the forged papers. $10,000 paid to a corrupt notary for a piece of paper that was now nothing more than evidence of a felony. He slowly reached out, picked up the documents, and shoved them back into his leather briefcase. The brass clasps clicked shut with a hollow, pathetic sound. He turned away from the glass. He and Liam walked toward the exit. They did not speak. The arrogant energy that had propelled them into the building had evaporated, leaving two desperate, ruined men in its wake. They pushed through the double glass doors and walked out into the bright California sun. The drive back to Palo Alto would be the longest 45 minutes of their lives. They had left the house as predators. They were returning as prey. They knew the girl waiting for them at the kitchen island was no longer a naive teenager they could manipulate. She was the architect of their destruction, and they had to walk back into the house and face her. The drive from Monterey to Palo Alto took Richard and Liam 52 minutes. They broke several speed limits on the Pacific Coast Highway. I tracked their estimated arrival time by calculating the distance and adding a small margin for morning traffic. While they were speeding north, furious and undone, I moved methodically through the house. I did not pack my bags in a frantic rush. I had spent the last month slowly transporting my most valuable items to Maya's secure storage unit. The only things left in my bedroom were clothes I could replace and a few textbooks. I placed 3 changes of clothes, my laptop, and a spare charger into a dark canvas duffel bag. I zipped it shut. The bag felt remarkably light. It felt like the physical manifestation of walking away. I carried the duffel downstairs and placed it next to the front door. I walked into the living room and sat on the white leather sofa. The house was impeccably clean, still smelling faintly of the expensive floral arrangements Patricia had ordered for the party. I picked up my biography of the Romanov dynasty, resting it on my lap, but I did not open it. I waited. At 10:15, the heavy hum of my father's luxury sedan vibrated against the garage door. The engine cut off abruptly. There was no usual pause, no casual gathering of briefcases or coffee cups. The door leading from the garage to the kitchen slammed open with enough force to rattle the dishes in the cabinets. Harper Richard bellowed. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual resonant authority. It sounded like metal scraping against stone. I stood up from the sofa. I walked into the hallway, stopping just outside the kitchen threshold. Richard was standing by the granite island, his face a mottled, terrifying shade of red. His tie was loose. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Liam stood behind him, looking like a man who had just been thrown from a moving vehicle. Liam's tailored blazer was unbuttoned, his hands buried deep in his pockets, his eyes darting frantically around the room. Patricia emerged from the second-floor landing, wrapping her silk robe tightly around her waist. She looked down at the scene, her manufactured vulnerability instantly replaced by confusion and alarm. "What is going on?" Patricia demanded, descending the stairs quickly. "Richard, why are you screaming?" Richard ignored her. He stepped toward me, closing the distance until he was only 3 feet away. He loomed over me, trying to use his physical presence to force submission. It was a tactic he used on contractors and junior loan officers. It did not work on me. I maintained eye contact, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "What did you do?" Richard demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "What kind of legal stunt did you pull in Monterey?" "I did not pull a stunt, Dad," I replied. My voice was calm, pitched slightly lower than usual to project absolute stability. I simply accepted the legal responsibility my grandmother left me. I activated the Beatrice Wilson Irrevocable Trust. Patricia gasped, coming to a halt at the bottom of the stairs. She looked back and forth between Richard and me, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. A trust. You knew about the Carmel property. "I have known for 6 months, Mom," I said, turning my gaze to her. "I knew when Dad first started making inquiries at the county office. I knew when you tried to convince me Beatrice was losing her mind. And I knew when you forced me to sign that generic family release form yesterday, hoping it would cover your tracks." Richard stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You have no idea what you have done. You have destroyed your brother's company. You have ruined this family. You are going to call this attorney Evelyn Davis right now, and you are going to instruct her to lift that list pendants. We are going to restructure this trust today." He reached out as if to grab my arm but stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air. "I cannot restructure the trust, Dad," I stated clearly. "And neither can you. The trust is irrevocable. That means the terms are permanent. The Carmel estate is completely sealed. You cannot sell it. You cannot leverage it for a bridge loan. And you certainly cannot steal it using a forged quitclaim deed stamped by a disgraced notary you met in the garage at 1 a.m. The kitchen went dead silent. The mention of the forged deed and the corrupt notary acted like a physical strike. Liam physically recoiled, backing away until his shoulders hit the refrigerator. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, blustering patriarch was suddenly confronted with the reality that his quiet, invisible daughter held a full audio recording of his felony conspiracy. "You recorded us," Liam whispered, his voice cracking. "I am an archivist, Liam," I replied, not breaking eye contact with my father. "I keep records, and attempting to file a fraudulent deed with a forged notary stamp is a state felony. If you push me, or if you try to retaliate, I will hand that audio file directly to the district attorney." Patricia broke the silence. She began to cry. It was not the theatrical, manufactured weeping she used to manipulate situations. It was the raw, ugly crying of a woman realizing her financial safety net was gone. "Harper, please," Patricia sobbed, reaching out toward me. "We are your family. We were just trying to survive. We made a mistake, but you cannot do this to us. You cannot tear this family apart over a house." I looked at my mother. The cold, hollow grief I had carried for months finally crystallized into hard, unbreakable truth. "I am not tearing this family apart, Mom," I said. My voice did not shake. "You tore it apart the moment you decided my future was acceptable collateral for Liam's ego. You viewed me as a disposable asset. You planned to steal my inheritance and then gaslight me into believing it was for my own good. You did not want a daughter, you wanted a donor." Richard's face contorted. The shame of being outmaneuvered by a teenager mutated violently into pure, unfiltered rage. He could not undo the trust. He could not erase the recording. The only power he had left was the primitive, desperate power of eviction. "Get out!" Richard snarled, spit flying from his lips. "If you are going to treat us like criminals, you can pack your bags and leave. I will not have an ungrateful, manipulative child living under my roof. Get out of this house." He raised his arm, pointing aggressively toward the front door. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for forgiveness, terrified of the threat of homelessness. He thought eviction was his final winning card. I turned away from him and walked the short distance to the front entryway. I picked up the dark canvas duffel bag by the straps. I slung it over my shoulder. "You cannot kick me out, Dad," I said, turning back to face them one last time. "I am already leaving." I reached for the brass handle of the heavy oak door. "Harper, wait!" Patricia cried out, taking a step forward. I did not wait. I opened the door. The bright California sun spilled into the foyer. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The heavy wood clicked securely into the frame, sealing my parents and my brother inside the wreckage of their own making. I walked down the driveway. I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the deflated silver balloons on the patio or the remnants of the fake birthday party. I walked 3 blocks to Maya's house. She was waiting for me in her driveway, the engine of her car already running. I threw my duffel bag into the back seat and climbed into the passenger side. "Drive," I told her. "Drive," I told. As we pulled away from the suburban neighborhood, I felt a profound sense of closure. The defensive phase of my operation was complete. I had survived the hostile environment. I had secured the asset. Now I just had to watch from a safe distance as the consequences of my father's arrogance collided with the brutal reality of corporate finance. Liam's investors were not going to be as forgiving as a teenage daughter. The fallout was going to be spectacular, and it was going to start on Monday morning. The speed at which a fabricated corporate empire collapses is breathtaking. It is not a slow descent. It is a sudden, violent implosion. Maya drove me directly to the storage facility where I paid for 3 months in advance, using my secure checking account. I moved into a small furnished sublet near the university campus later that afternoon. I turned my phone off for 48 hours to establish a baseline of silence. When I finally turned it back on, the digital wreckage was waiting for me in the form of voicemails, emails, and frantic text messages. I did not reply to a single one. I simply cataloged the timeline of their destruction. The first domino fell on Monday morning, exactly as Marcus Thorne had promised. Marcus was not a man who operated on extensions or sentimental delays. He expected the executed quitclaim deed for the Carmel estate to be sitting in his inbox by 9 o'clock. When the deadline passed with no email, he dialed Liam's cell phone. Liam ignored the call. He was sitting in the living room of the Palo Alto house, staring blankly at the wall, paralyzed by the realization that he had no collateral to offer. Marcus Thorne did not leave a voicemail. He initiated a hostile takeover protocol. As the lead investor holding the majority of the Series A preferred stock, Marcus possessed specific contractual triggers embedded in the initial funding agreement. If Liam failed to secure the bridge loan and defaulted on the operating capital requirements, the board of directors could immediately vote to remove the founder and assume executive control. By Tuesday afternoon, Liam received a formal legal notice via courier. He was locked out of his own corporate email accounts. His access badges to the South of Market office space were deactivated. He was officially terminated as the chief executive officer of the lifestyle optimization platform he built. But losing the title was only the beginning of the nightmare. When venture capital firms execute a hostile takeover due to financial insolvency, their first objective is asset recovery. Marcus Thorne deployed a team of forensic accountants to audit Liam's internal ledgers. They were looking for whatever salvageable intellectual property they could sell off to recoup their initial investment. What they found instead was a trail of profound, arrogant deception. During the frantic weeks leading up to my birthday, Liam had submitted updated financial disclosures to the investor board, attempting to demonstrate stability while he stalled for time. In those disclosures, Liam explicitly listed the Carmel by the Sea estate as a pending corporate asset, claiming it was already secured under his LLC and merely awaiting final municipal processing. He had lied on official corporate documents submitted to institutional investors. In Silicon Valley, burning through cash is considered a rite of passage. Mismanaging a product launch is forgivable, but lying about collateral on a financial disclosure is a death sentence. It crosses the line from gross incompetence into deliberate, actionable fraud. On Thursday morning, the legal department representing Marcus Thorne filed a civil lawsuit in the San Francisco Superior Court. The complaint named Liam Wilson as the primary defendant. They sued him for breach of contract, fiduciary negligence, and fraudulent misrepresentation. They demanded the immediate repayment of the initial $400,000 seed capital, plus punitive damages and legal fees. The lawsuit triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Liam had no personal assets. His bank accounts were empty. The luxury car he leased was repossessed from the driveway of our parents' house by Friday evening. Facing a multimillion-dollar judgment he could never hope to pay, Liam had only one option left. He contacted a bankruptcy attorney and began drafting the paperwork for Chapter 7 liquidation. The golden child, the boy who was supposed to build a dynasty, was legally declaring himself worthless at the age of 24. If the fallout had been contained to Liam, Richard and Patricia might have survived battered but intact. But my parents had bound their financial fate to his long before the forged deed was ever conceived. They had built their ledger on his foundation, and when his foundation cracked, the entire structure collapsed. When Richard pulled the $400,000 secondary mortgage on the Palo Alto house to fund Liam's initial launch, the bank required personal guarantees. Patricia had opened 3 high-limit credit cards, but she had also co-signed 2 of Liam's commercial equipment leases for his office space. They were legally entangled in his corporate debt. The moment Liam's company defaulted and entered liquidation, the creditors shifted their focus to the co-signers. The notices began arriving the following week. The equipment leasing company demanded immediate payment in full for the custom glass whiteboards and ergonomic chairs, citing the default clauses Patricia had signed. The credit card companies, detecting the sudden spike in risk algorithms associated with the family name, aggressively slashed her credit limits and initiated collection procedures on the $40,000 balance. But the fatal blow came from the bank holding the mortgages on the Palo Alto house. Richard had missed 2 consecutive payments on the primary mortgage while he diverted every available dollar into bribing Vince the notary and keeping up the illusion of wealth. He had planned to use a portion of Liam's bridge loan to bring the mortgage current. With the bridge loan dead and Liam facing bankruptcy, Richard had zero liquidity. On the 3rd week of November, the bank issued a formal notice of default. It was the first legal step in the foreclosure process. The document was nailed to the heavy oak front door of the house they had spent years trying to leverage. The financial ruin they had meticulously planned to inflict upon me had boomeranged with terrifying precision. They had tried to steal a debt-free coastal estate to save themselves. Instead, their failure exposed the raw, rotting core of their own finances. They were losing the house. They were losing the cars. They were losing the carefully curated status they valued above all else. I monitored the collapse through public court filings and county property records. I sat in my quiet sublet drinking coffee, watching the legal system dismantle the people who had viewed me as a disposable asset. I did not feel pity. Pity requires a foundation of empathy, and they had burned that foundation to the ground when they sat in the garage and plotted a felony. The destruction was objective, clean, and entirely self-inflicted. But Patricia was not a woman who accepted defeat quietly. She could not change the math on the bank ledgers, but she believed she could still manipulate the social ledger. She needed a scapegoat. She needed the affluent neighbors and country club members to believe she was the victim of a ruthless, ungrateful child. She thought she could control the narrative in Palo Alto, assuming I would stay hidden in my sublet and refuse to defend myself. She did not realize that while I was invisible, my attorney was not. And Evelyn Davis was about to deliver the final crushing blow in front of the very audience Patricia was trying to manipulate. In an affluent California suburb like Palo Alto, financial ruin is considered a private tragedy, but social exile is treated like a terminal illness. When a family receives a notice of default on their mortgage, the standard procedure is to retreat. You cancel your club memberships, you quietly sell your vehicles, and you fade into the background of a less expensive zip code. Patricia Wilson refused to fade. She could not change the arithmetic on the bank ledgers. She could not unfreeze Liam's corporate accounts or erase the civil lawsuits piling up on Richard's desk. But my mother operated under the delusion that if she could just control the narrative, she could salvage her status. She needed a scapegoat to explain her sudden steep descent from grace. She decided to wage a public relations war on the only battlefield she still had access to: the Sunday brunch service at the Oak Creek Country Club. The country club was a sanctuary of manicured lawns, vaulted ceilings, and quiet privilege. It was a place where reputations were built and dismantled over plates of eggs, Benedict and crystal flutes of imported champagne. Patricia booked a table in the center of the main dining room. She wore a tailored beige dress selected specifically to project an image of elegant, restrained suffering. She invited 3 of the most influential women in her social circle, including Mrs. Gable, the neighbor I had handed a slice of cake to on the night of my birthday. Patricia waited until the waiter poured the coffee before she launched her campaign. She leaned across the white linen tablecloth, lowering her voice to a theatrical, conspiratorial whisper. She began weaving a story of profound, shocking betrayal. She told them that my grandmother Beatrice had been suffering from severe, undocumented cognitive decline in her final years. Patricia painted a tragic picture of an elderly woman losing her grip on reality, isolated in her coastal estate. Then Patricia introduced the villain of her story. She cast me as a ruthless, manipulative sociopath who had exploited a dying woman's confusion. Harper isolated her, Patricia whispered, dabbing the corner of her eye with a cloth napkin. She convinced Beatrice to sign away the Carmel property in secret. We had no idea. We were just trying to restructure the family assets to keep Liam's company afloat during a temporary market downturn. Harper waited until her 18th birthday locked us out of the accounts and stole the equity we needed to survive. She put her own father on the street out of pure spite. The three women at the table gasped in unison. They murmured their sympathies. In their wealthy, curated world, the idea of a rebellious teenager destroying a family fortune was a terrifying, scandalous thrill. They leaned in closer, eager to consume every bitter detail Patricia was willing to serve. Patricia was winning the table. She was successfully rewriting the history of her own greed. But my mother failed to account for a critical variable. Oak Creek Country Club did not just cater to the suburban housewives of Silicon Valley. It maintained reciprocal dining privileges with several elite private clubs in the city. Seated 2 tables away, enjoying a late breakfast with a senior partner from a corporate defense firm, was Evelyn Davis. Evelyn was not a woman who missed a detail. She had spent decades in courtrooms analyzing the vocal cadence of hostile witnesses. She recognized Patricia's voice. She heard my name. She sat quietly sipping a cup of black espresso, listening to my mother spin a fabricated web of elder abuse and financial theft. Evelyn did not possess a temper. She possessed a surgical, unyielding dedication to the factual record. She placed her espresso cup on the porcelain saucer. She excused herself to her dining companion. She stood up, smoothed the front of her sharp gray suit, and walked directly toward Patricia's table. Evelyn did not shout. She did not create a chaotic scene. She simply stopped at the edge of the white linen tablecloth, casting a long shadow over my mother's plate. "Excuse me," Evelyn said. Her voice was pitched at a low, authoritative frequency that instantly commanded the attention of the entire table. The 3 socialites looked up, startled. Patricia blinked, a flash of irritation crossing her face at the interruption. "I do not believe we have been formally introduced in person." Patricia Evelyn continued, her gaze locking onto my mother like a laser target. "My name is Evelyn Davis. I am a trust attorney based in San Francisco." The color drained from Patricia's cheeks. Her jaw went slack. The name hit her like a physical strike. It was the name that had flashed on the county clerk's monitor. The name that had dropped the barricade on the Carmel estate. Mrs. Gable frowned, looking back and forth between the 2 women. "Do you know each other, Patricia?" "We know of each other," Evelyn stated smoothly, turning her attention to the 3 guests. "I could not help but overhear your creative recounting of recent events regarding the Beatrice Wilson Irrevocable Trust. As the managing trustee of that estate for the past 6 years, I feel a professional obligation to correct the public record." Patricia placed her hands flat on the table, her knuckles turning white. "You need to leave," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This is a private conversation." "It ceased to be private the moment you decided to slander my client in a crowded dining room," Evelyn replied. She looked directly at Mrs. Gable. Beatrice Wilson did not suffer from cognitive decline. She passed a rigorous, documented medical evaluation the week she established the trust. She removed the Carmel estate from her personal holdings precisely because she knew her son and grandson would attempt to liquidate her home to cover their reckless corporate debts. The dining room around them grew quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped at the adjacent tables. People were listening. Harper did not manipulate anyone. Evelyn continued, her tone ringing with cold, undeniable authority. She merely stepped into the role her grandmother legally designed for her. She protected the asset, which was a necessary precaution considering the alternative. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You are a liar!" Patricia cried, her elegant facade cracking into a mask of pure panic. "You and that ungrateful girl stole our property." Evelyn did not flinch. She delivered the final devastating blow with the casual ease of a predator finishing a hunt. "Your husband did not lose his house because of a teenager," Evelyn said, her voice carrying through the silent dining room. "He lost it because he drove to Monterey County and attempted to record a fraudulent quitclaim deed. A deed he stamped with a forged seal he purchased from a disgraced notary in the middle of the night." The 3 socialites at the table recoiled. They physically leaned back in their chairs, pulling away from Patricia as if she had suddenly caught fire. "And just to be entirely transparent," Evelyn added, offering a thin, razor-sharp smile, "the Monterey District Attorney is currently reviewing a crystal-clear audio recording of your husband negotiating that $10,000 bribe. I suggest you spend less time drinking mimosas with your friends and more time securing criminal defense counsel." Evelyn did not wait for a response. She gave a slight polite nod to the three horrified guests, turned her back on my mother, and walked calmly out of the dining room. The silence she left behind was total and suffocating. Patricia stood at the table alone. She looked at Mrs. Gable. She looked at the other two women. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of defense, to spin another lie. But there was nothing left to spin. In the wealthy enclaves of Silicon Valley, losing venture capital is an accepted risk. But committing a felony forgery is an unforgivable social sin. Mrs. Gable picked up her designer handbag from the empty chair. She did not say a word. She simply stood up, turned her back on Patricia, and walked away. The other two women immediately followed suit, leaving their champagne glasses untouched. Within 60 seconds, Patricia was standing alone in the center of the country club. The whispers erupted around her, a tidal wave of judgment and condemnation. The public ruin she had tried to inflict upon me had been inverted. She was stripped of her social standing, humiliated in front of her peers, and exposed as a criminal accomplice. She picked up her purse and fled the building, running toward the parking lot in tears. I did not witness any of this in person. I was sitting on the balcony of my small sublet, drinking a cup of green tea, watching the campus traffic below. Evelyn called me at 2 o'clock that afternoon. She gave me a concise, objective summary of the interaction in the dining room. She did not gloat. She simply reported the facts of the engagement. "The narrative is corrected," Evelyn told me over the phone. "You will not have to worry about your mother showing her face in public circles again anytime soon." I thanked her and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair, letting the California sun warm my face. I felt a profound sense of awe at the mechanics of the victory. I never had to scream. I never had to argue in the mud. I never had to defend my character to neighbors who did not truly know me. The truth was a shield, and Beatrice had forged it out of steel. The people who tried to destroy me had been dismantled by their own arrogance, leaving nothing but clean, quiet air in their wake. The battle in Palo Alto was over. It was time for me to pack my bags one last time and head south. It was time to claim the anchor. It took 2 months for the legal dust to settle. Once the Monterey County District Attorney formally charged Richard and Liam with attempted real estate fraud and felony forgery, the foreclosure on the Palo Alto house accelerated. The bank auctioned the property in early January to recoup the defaulted mortgages. My parents and my brother were forced to pack their remaining possessions into rented moving trucks. They relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy commercial district in San Jose, miles away from the manicured lawns of their former country club. I did not attend the auction. I did not help them pack their boxes. Instead, I signed a month-to-month lease termination on my sublet near the university. I loaded my canvas duffel bag and the cardboard boxes I had stored in Maya's secure locker into the trunk of a hired car. I drove south down the Pacific Coast Highway, leaving the sprawling concrete of Silicon Valley behind me forever. I arrived at the Carmel by the Sea estate just before sunset. The fog was rolling in off the water, bringing that familiar heavy scent of crushed pine needles and ocean brine. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped inside. The house was exactly as Beatrice had left it. The weathered cedar walls stood firm. The wide plank floorboards absorbed the sound of my footsteps. The silence inside the estate was not the tense, suffocating quiet of the house in Palo Alto. It was the deep, resonant stillness of a fortress that had withstood a lengthy siege. My family did not surrender easily. Ledger builders never stop looking for a loophole even when the ledger is bankrupt. Over the next 3 weeks, my phone became a repository for their desperation. They did not have the means to hire corporate defense lawyers to contest the irrevocable trust, so they resorted to the only tactic they had left: emotional extortion. I sat at the granite kitchen counter one morning, drinking a dark roast coffee, listening to the voicemails they left overnight. I did not block their numbers immediately upon moving in. I wanted a documented record of their unraveling. Richard called first. His voice lacked the booming resonant authority he used to command a boardroom. It was thin and reedy. He talked about forgiveness. He said the family needed to heal from the misunderstandings of the past year. He suggested with stunning arrogance that I allow them to move into the guest wing of the Carmel estate so they could get back on their feet while the criminal charges were sorted out. He framed it as an opportunity for me to show maturity and grace. Patricia called next. She utilized her trademark tears. She talked about the terrible conditions of the San Jose apartment. She complained about the noise from the street traffic. She mentioned Liam was working a minimum wage retail job to pay his legal fees and struggling with the harsh reality of Chapter 7 liquidation. She asked how I could sleep in a coastal mansion while my own flesh and blood suffered in poverty. The conflict in my chest was brief but sharp. Society conditions daughters to be caretakers. We are taught to absorb the failures of our parents and twist them into our own personal obligations. For a fraction of a second, the heavy weight of guilt knocked at the door. I pictured them in a tiny apartment stripped of their status facing public ruin. Then I remembered the audio recording in the dark garage. I remembered the $10,000 bribe paid to a corrupt notary. I remembered the generic release form my mother slid across the island smiling while she tried to strip me of my future. I pressed the delete button. I cleared the voicemail inbox. Then I accessed my network provider settings and permanently blocked their phone numbers. The final tether was cut. The boundary was sealed in stone. I walked down the hallway and entered Beatrice's study. The room still smelled of old paper and black tea. I sat in the leather wingback chair behind the solid mahogany desk. I ran my hands over the smooth, polished wood. During the frantic afternoon following the funeral, I had only checked the deep bottom drawer on the right side to find the hidden compartment. I had ignored the shallow center drawer, assuming it held nothing but loose paper clips and dried pens. I reached out and pulled the center drawer open. It was empty except for a single heavy stock envelope resting precisely in the middle of the felt lining. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's sharp, sloping ink. I broke the wax seal. I unfolded the thick stationery. The date at the top indicated she had written it 3 days before she passed away. Harper, the letter began. If you are sitting at this desk, it means the barricade held. It means you survived the collision. I know the choice you had to make was not easy. It goes against every human instinct to lock the door on the people who raised you. But you must understand the difference between price and value. I read the words slowly, hearing her steady, calm voice in my mind. Your father knows the price of everything, Beatrice wrote. He knows the appraisal value of this land. He knows the interest rates on his commercial loans. But he understands the value of nothing. He does not value loyalty. He does not value honesty. He does not value you. True family protects you before you even know you need a shield. They do not view your future as a raw material to be harvested for their own gain. This house is an anchor. It is yours. Keep the floorboards clean, watch the fog roll in, and never apologize for surviving a storm you did not create. I folded the letter. I placed it gently back into the envelope. The validation washed over me, reinforcing the perimeter I had drawn around my life. Beatrice had seen the exact trajectory of my father's greed. She had known the guilt would try to creep into my mind, and she left me one final, undeniable truth to combat it. I settled into a quiet, deliberate routine. I transitioned my digital records fellowship into a remote, full-time archivist position for a historical foundation in Monterey. I spent my mornings cataloging early 20th century coastal maps on my laptop from the mahogany desk. I spent my afternoons maintaining the property. I cleared the fallen pine needles from the gutters. I polished the brass light fixtures. I kept the house exactly as it was intended to be kept. The estate required constant physical work, but the labor was deeply satisfying. Every swept floor and repaired cedar shingle was an active rejection of my father's worldview. He saw the house as liquid cash waiting to be spent. I saw it as a legacy meant to be preserved. My brother and my parents remained in San Jose. Their social exile in Silicon Valley was permanent. Liam's name became a cautionary tale among venture capitalists. Richard faced a suspended business license and ongoing court dates. They were trapped in a prison constructed entirely from their own choices. They were ledger builders who had simply run out of columns to manipulate. I walked out onto the back deck. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, casting a brilliant bruised purple light across the water. The wind whipped through the branches of the ancient Monterey pines. I wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shoulders and sat in one of the wooden Adirondack chairs. I listened to the steady rhythmic crash of the waves against the rocks below. There is a profound peace in drawing a hard line. You do not owe your loyalty to people who view you as currency. You do not owe your future to a family that plans to spend it. The hardest lesson I ever learned was that blood does not automatically grant someone a seat at your table. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and let the predators starve. That is my story. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your experience. When was the exact moment you realized you had to stop setting yourself on fire to keep your toxic family warm? I read every single response. Thank you for listening. It has been exactly 1 year since I walked out the front door of the house in Palo Alto. The seasons in Carmel by the Sea do not change with sudden dramatic shifts. The fog rolls in and the fog rolls out. I sit at my grandmother's mahogany desk every morning to work, and I watch the ocean from the back deck every evening. I have not spoken to my parents or my brother. The silence, which once felt like a strict tactical requirement, now just feels like peace. People often ask how I navigated that level of betrayal without losing my mind. Looking back at the quiet war I fought under my own roof, I realized my survival came down to 5 fundamental truths. First, preparation is always stronger than confrontation. When you realize the people around you are plotting your ruin, your immediate instinct is to scream and demand answers. Do not scream. Gather the receipts. Read the fine print. Let your enemies talk while you secure the perimeter. A silent, documented defense is the deadliest weapon you can wield against arrogance. Second, blood does not demand blind loyalty. We are conditioned by society to believe that family requires endless forgiveness and infinite sacrifice. But if your family views you as a disposable asset, they have already severed the tie themselves. You do not owe your future to people who are actively trying to spend it. Third, the golden child dynamic destroys everyone it touches. My parents sacrificed their morals, their home, and my safety to protect Liam from his own failures. By shielding him from natural consequences, they guaranteed his total catastrophic collapse. True accountability is not a punishment, it is a requirement for survival. Fourth, you must never confuse the price of a thing with its actual value. My father looked at this coastal estate and only saw liquid equity to fix his mistakes. Beatrice saw an anchor. People who only build ledgers will strip a home down to the copper wiring if you let them. You have to decide what you are building. Finally, walking away is a complete and valid victory. You do not need to stay in a toxic environment and convince your abusers that they are wrong. You do not need to extract an apology to heal. Sometimes winning simply means closing the heavy oak door and letting the predators starve on the other side. I step out onto the wooden deck. The cold salt air fills my lungs. The sun sinks below the horizon, painting the Pacific Ocean in deep shades of indigo and gray. The house stands firm against the wind. I kept my promise to my grandmother. I did not let them take it. The anchor holds. Thank you for listening to my journey today. If you have ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace, or if you had to walk away from people who were supposed to protect you, I want to hear your experience in the comments below. You are not alone. Please hit the subscribe button to join our growing community here at Hazel Tells Stories. We have many more tales of quiet survival, deep family secrets, and ultimate justice waiting to be told. I will see you in the next video.